With reports of more violence in Syria, the Red Cross is calling for a daily ceasefire in the country now, with Moscow putting its weight behind the move. The 2-hour truce is needed to evacuate the wounded and allow in food and medicine. UN teams currently in the country for a government-led humanitarian mission, and they're trying to launch a monitoring operation to help end the crisis. Human Rights Watch has accused the Syrian opposition of abuses, including kidnapping, detention, and even torture of security force members. The recent spate of violence in Syrian cities has made the regime point their fingers at Saudi Arabia and Qatar, saying the Arab states were involved in terror blasts. For more perspective on this, I'm joined by James Corbett, editor of the independent news website CorbettReport.com. So now the violence has been raging for more than a year, and over the weekend we saw 2 deadly terror blasts. Do you think we're going to see an increase in the attacks in this country? Do you think Damascus could become another insurgent flashpoint in the Middle East?
Well, unfortunately, the cycle of violence shows absolutely no signs of abating. And as you point out, the weekend terror blasts are a particularly horrifying harbinger of things to come as the fighting does move towards the Syrian capital of Damascus and does start to affect the people living there. And absolutely, those terror blasts are particularly worrying because they were, of course, targeting the Air Force intelligence and national security buildings, extremely high profile and high risk targets that are defended by military assets. So it does seem to prove the point that Assad has been making for some time, that there is clearly some international coordination and arming of these so-called ragtag rebels who are supposedly doing this. It would seem to point to that. And yet in the Western media, paradoxically enough, you now have many media sources claiming some sort of conspiracy theory whereby Assad is apparently attacking his own buildings in order to garner international sympathy. So it's interesting to see how the tried and tested and true method of false flag terror suddenly becomes viable when it's something that they can level against a supposed enemy of the West. So it's interesting to see that. Well,
the conspiracy theories may seem at one part of ridiculous, but also at the same time, don't you think it doesn't necessarily take outside help to tell some insurgents where the intelligence building is, does it?
It would certainly require a lot more sophistication than any of the attacks that we've seen so far, especially considering the fact that military assets are deployed to defend those buildings, and certainly it also points to the arming and equipping of those insurgents who certainly and demonstrably have been armed through supply routes through Iraq by Saudi Arabia and others, and have admittedly been so for quite a while now. So it just goes to further prove that point.
How optimistic are you about Kofi Annan's proposals to broker a ceasefire in the country?
Unfortunately, I think after we saw the debacle of the Arab League observers' mission to Syria and what became of that and the resignation of the head of that and all of the things that surrounded that, I think it shows that at this point, diplomacy isn't really what any of the sides are looking for. I think, unfortunately, it's very much a contest that right now that's going to be won or lost on through attacks like the ones we saw on the weekend and other things like that. I don't think at this point that anyone is truly looking for a diplomatic solution, so I can't hold out much hope for the Annan visit, although certainly one would hope there would be some sort of peaceful resolution to this.
Now, in terms of the Western states and the Arab states that are backing the opposition, do you think they're mainly looking for regime change, or do you think that they would settle for a peace deal in the country?
Well, given the incredible reforms that we've seen over the past year that have been proposed by the Assad government and to some extent implemented, the amnesty, the granting of nationality to the Kurds in the east, the media laws, the draft resolution, draft constitution, all of these things that we've seen. I mean, there's been more reform in Syria in the past year than there has been in the past 50. And if that's not enough to at least bring the sides to the table to start some sort of negotiation, then one would have to imagine that nothing will. So regime change seems to be absolutely the inevitable course that the West and others have set their eyes on at this point.
Now, finally, the opposition leaders have admitted getting that some foreign governments are sending weapons and expertise their way. How does that sit with the humanitarian initiatives of the West?
Well, I think that gives the lie to the idea that this is humanitarian at all. Certainly, arming and giving weapons to the insurgents is absolutely designed for nothing else than to cause more bloodshed, and the idea of doing that in a humanitarian fashion, I think, is laughable on its face, and once again goes to prove the point that really diplomacy isn't the end game here. The end game is to get rid of Assad, and unfortunately, we see that playing out right now. So one has to hope that recent initiatives like the Red Cross call for the ceasefire on a daily basis and things like that could have some sort of effect. But at this point, it really seems the cycle of violence is just escalating.
All right, James Corbett from CorbettReport.com. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.